Okay. I mean, you can again share. I just stopped your screen sharing for the moment, so that after the opening remarks, we can start.
Shweta, we will start.
Sure, sir. सर्वमंगल मांगल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते. Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University is celebrating 25th anniversary at this blissful occasion of Silver Jubilee celebration, that is Rajat Mahotsav. Various programs have been planned and organized at different levels. School of Shastric Learning has made this attempt an international one by organizing international lectures. As it has been visible that Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University is emerging as one of the leading multidisciplinary universities with the aim to rejuvenate and disseminate the universal values, knowledge, wisdom, and vision presented in Sanskrit language and literature. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this third lecture of International Lecture Series organized by School of Shastric Learning, Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, Ramte. First of all, I would like to welcome Chairperson of today's program, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Madhusudan Penna sir, who is the source of inspiration for organizing such type of events and also a constant support. We welcome you, sir. It is an honor to welcome today's guest speaker, Mitra Desai ji, author from Canberra, Australia. On behalf of Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, I welcome you, madam, at this occasion. Then I would like to welcome Professor Krishna Kumar Pandey, sir, Dean, Faculty of Ancient Indian Sciences and Humanities and Director of Silver Jubilee Celebrations. I welcome Professor Hare Krishna Agasti, sir, Campus Director, Param Pujya Golwarkar Guruji Gurukulam Campus. I would like to welcome Professor Parag Joshi, sir, and Director, School of Shastric Learning. Respected Registrar Ramachandra Joshi, sir, Dean of various faculties, directors, heads of all the departments, and dear students. On behalf of School of Shastric Learning, Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, I cordially welcome you all at this third lecture of International Lecture Series organized on the occasion of 25th anniversary of Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University. Now I request Professor Parag Joshi sir to give introductory remark at this occasion.
Thank you, Dr. Shetan. Namo Namaha Sarvedhyah. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Madhusudan Penna sir, today's speaker, Mitra Desai ji, coordinator of Rajatotsav Silver Jubilee celebration, Professor Krishna Kumar Pandey ji, all other respected deans, heads, and teachers of our HASU, and most importantly, our students, dear research scholars. I take this opportunity to just explore the idea behind this ILS lecture series. It was the occasion of Silver Jubilee Rajatotsav, and we were celebrating since last 1 year by organizing several academic and cultural and social oriented activities. And our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Penna ji, was the motive behind this international lecture series. As today we know that IKS is the coined topic to promote the interdisciplinary research on all aspects of Indian knowledge systems, government of India and all other higher education institutes are promoting the IKS studying Indian knowledge systems, preserve and disseminate the Indian knowledge system for further research and societal applications. And we also thought to work on it, and internationally we created this platform of international lecture series, and the occasion is of Silver Jubilee celebration. So in totally we are in plan of organizing 5 international lectures, And the first one of Francis Prasad from Germany, it was on the topic of Indology. Another one of Laura Yerekeshova from Kazakhstan, who gave her opinion about the rasa and rasanubhava and symbolism. And today we are having the third lecture of Mitra Desai ji on IKS, especially the core theme of our ILS lecture series. And in the next week, we are having another international speaker with us from Sri Lanka. And in the concluding session, we are having one scholar from Thailand, Jothua. And by these 5 lectures, we will be concluding the international lecture series specially organized on the occasion of Rajatotsava, and which was based on the Indian knowledge system. So on behalf of School of Shastrik Learning, I welcome today's speaker Mitra Desai ji, and I also thanks our authorities of KKSU to believe on us, and they have just given opportunity to our School of Shastrik Learning to organize such a innovative international lecture series. So I will take leave from my introductory remark and welcome to all respected deans, heads, statutory officers, and research scholars and faculty members of KKSU. Let us have today's wonderful lecture on IKS. Welcome once again, Mitra Desai ji, and thanks to Dr. Sheth.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Before listening to Mitra Desai ji, I would like to just briefly introduce Mitra Desai ji to you all. Author of Shitara, How India Enabled Vaccination. Mitra Desai ji is basically from Shitara, Kolhapur. And it is here that she did her schooling and earned her degree of law and interior design. Following her education in law, she pursued higher education in America, where she completed her master's in criminal justice. And after a brief period back in India, her husband's job took the family to Australia, where she has lived and worked for more than a decade now. In her professional life, she has worked across various public service regulators in various roles. She currently holds a leadership position within the public sector and outside of work. She is busy connecting the dots that reveal unheard stories about India that give each one of us something to be proud of. She shares her work through online lectures, articles, podcasts, and educational videos on her website and YouTube channels. We welcome you, madam, and just short description about her research work. Research also presented at audio, visual, and micro documentary with noted Mahabharat researcher Nilesh Oak and popular history blogger Sanket Kulkarni, that Sushruta and his Samhita. Then Marathi video series with Indologist Dipali Patwadkar. आपला सांस्कृतिक वर्ष, मराठी short stories on Adi Shankaracharya, Marathi video series with Indologist Kimaya Joshi and Girinath Bharade, आपली पुराणे व पुराण कथा. So through her all these works, we can see how she is exploring IKS through her efforts. We welcome you, madam, and we are very much eager to listen.
Thank you. Namaskar. उपस्थित सर्व गुरुजनांना, विदुषी, विद्वानांना आणि स्कॉलर्सना माझा मनपूर्वक नमस्कार. तुम्ही आज मला ही संधी दिली आहे तुमच्या सगळ्यांशी संवाद साधायची. त्याचा मला फार छान वाटतंय. मी स्क्रीन शेअर करायला सुरुवात करू का? चालेल? Slides distat ka, madam?
Not yet, madam.
Can you see the slides?
No, ma'am.
No? Oh. Okay, bear with me a sec. Can you see them now?
Yes, ma'am. Now it is visible.
Yeah, and you can only see the slides, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay. ठीक है. सुरू करें. सुरू करण्याआधी शास्त्रिक स्कूल ऑफ लर्निंग तसंच कवी कुलगुरू कालिदास संस्कृत युनिव्हर्सिटी सर्व संचालक मंडळाचे सुद्धा मी सुरुवातीलाच आभार मानते. त्याचबरोबर as is customary here in Australia, let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking to you from today. I'm speaking to you from the Gabi Gabi people's country, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. What you can see on the screen now is a short excerpt by one of the indigenous elders, Dr. Eve Mumba. Now, she tells us that the indigenous people of the Gabi Gabi country have looked after this land for 18,000 years. And theirs is a history of welcoming the visitors, but there's also is a history where in the past 160 years, since the British first came here in 1824, nearly 3,000 men, women, and children were killed. But they still say that we are resilient because our land continues to sustain us. And I put this out here because this is a very poignant excerpt which brings out the shared connection between Bharat and Australia. And that connection is one of being colonized, which resonates with both civilizations till date. Now, decolonizing IKS or Indian knowledge systems or any curriculum really demands that we look at our shared assumptions about how the world is, particularly assumptions around regarding racial and civilizational hierarchy. I'm going to try and do that through 3 stories that clearly demonstrate the value of our knowledge systems and how they were appropriated from us. We'll also look at how our gigantic contribution has been all but erased and what the colonizers have done with that appropriated knowledge. Finally, we'll briefly touch upon what this means for us today. So let me start by laying out what I mean by decolonization. Now, colonization effectively is an invasion. It's a group of people usurping the land and imposing their own culture on any indigenous peoples. As we saw from the Gabi Gabi people's testimony, which is similar to Bharat's lived experience, colonization is a very physical, psychological, emotional, intellectual, and a financially debilitating experience. It strikes at the very core of who we are as a people. So it follows that decolonization or shedding this yoke will be an equally complex and multi-layered process. Now, in recent years, it has come to mean various things. We recently saw that with the Black Lives Matter movement that erupted across US and then the world. We also saw land back movements instituted by indigenous peoples across the world. We've also seen prominent statues being defaced and pulled down for being racist. Now, racism also comes across as an idea that's deeply ingrained in the colonial ventures, and therefore it forms an integral part of the decolonization conversation as well. Ultimately, decolonization has emerged as a strong voice that talks about restorative justice through cultural, psychological, and economic freedom. Today, I hope to assert that decolonizing knowledge systems as well is probably fundamental to Bharat's experience, which is quite unique. So with full awareness of the complexity of this topic, for our purposes today, I'm going to say that to decolonize means to become free from the dominating influence of a colonizing power. And now it's a bit of an oxymoron today, because to understand why we must decolonize our thinking and our conditioning, I'm going to present stories to show what happens if we don't. Now, Indian knowledge system is a huge topic in its scope. So for our conversation today, I will limit the scope to Ayurvedic books and the ancient wisdom that we can glean from these texts. And when I say stories, I'm not presenting to you fiction, but I'm presenting to you facts. Facts that have been deliberately obfuscated or shared as half-truths, because the ultimate goal remains to erase them from all public memory. Now, our first story will start with the word that it has dominated our lives, vaccine. So we will look at how the Bharatiya knowledge became a stepping stone to vaccination as we understand it today. It will flow into the second story, which demonstrates the phenomenal knowledge coming out of our Sushrut Samhita, which was instrumental in giving the European world and our colonizers the gift of surgery as well as medical advances. Now, the first and the second stories, they're a bigger body of work that are already available in the public domain. But I have chosen only a small subset of that information here. But if anyone's curious, you're welcome to look them up online or on my website, tejamybharat.com. Our final story is sure to surprise you, but today is the first time I'm actually connecting the dots and talking about it in the public domain. So let's dive in. And I can assure you this is not going to be a boring lecture, because like a column or a rangoli, you're going to have to connect the dots with me. So I'm going to keep you on your toes. Okay, so the very first question is why? And here I am giving you a spoiler alert. Although through this presentation, I will try to draw out the answer to this question about why we need to decolonize IKS. In exchange, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to ask the scholars and the students here to show us how you're going to do it. So the answer really is simple, but it's twofold. Firstly, it's because if the lion never roars, the bounty hunters will tell this story. And secondly, because it's an idea whose time has come. It is time for us, the progenitors of this ancient knowledge, to claim our rightful place in this conversation. We need to turn this monologue into a dialogue, and that to a dialogue of equals. Now, like I said at the outset, we will need to engage with our assumptions regarding racial and civilizational hierarchy as we go through this journey. So to do so, let's first look at an incident which I believe sent us on the path which has brought us to where we are today, of colonizing our minds, our thinking, as well as our education. If you haven't guessed it already, I'm referring to the Macaulay's Minute of 1835. It is an excellent insight into how our colonizers viewed us and themselves. Now, a little background. So in 1813, there was already a charter in place, which allocated ₹1 lakh by the British government for educating the subjects. At this point, we must note that missionaries were already present in this country, and they were involved in the field of education as well. However, they chiefly imparted religious education because their primary motive was to Christianize the heathen natives. So on this background, Macaulay landed in India in June 1834, and he came here as the president of the General Committee of Public Instructions. Now, in this particular minute, he is forcefully writing to the British government advocating that English should be made the court language. It's a lengthy 18-20-page document, which I'll encourage everyone to read. So as you can see on the excerpt that's on your screen, he clearly tells us that in the part of India where he was from at the time, which was the Bengal presidency, it contained neither literary nor scientific information. So that is his initial assessment. Now, did he base this assessment on knowledge of the languages? Well, he tells us himself that I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic. But then, despite having no knowledge of the languages, he has convinced that the entire native literature, the entire literature of India and Arabia was probably worth a single shelf of a good European library. So as you can see, that he's convinced of the intrinsic superiority of the Western literature. Now, as we read further, he goes on to say that all the historical information which has been collected from all the books written in Sanskrit language is less valuable than what may be found in the most paltry abridgments used at the preparatory schools in England. So basically what he's saying is, even the English kindergarten does a better job than all the libraries. Okay, so that is where he's coming from. In the final excerpt that you see here, we see his true motivations. He does not want the British Parliament to spend their monies on teaching what he calls false history, false astronomy, false medicine, because we find them in the company of a false religion. Now, I probably don't need to tell this august audience that what he deems to be the true religion is obviously Christianity. So what's on full display in this Macaulay Minute is the racial and the civilizational superiority that was ingrained in those who came to colonize Bharat. We see their gross dislike for the indigenous civilization, its languages, its religion, and anything that came out of it. Well, almost anything. They still had a love and affinity for the money and the resources. So it should come as no surprise that following his emphatic minute in 1837, the British Parliament made English as the official court language. In fact, the matter that I'm speaking to you today in English demonstrates the success of this policy, which is why I would love nothing more than to have this conversation with you in Marathi or Sanskrit one day. Okay, so let us jump right into our first story. So Shitara, this is a book that's published by Subu Publication in India. It's basically a story of a young girl with a colonized worldview about Bharat. And the book is her journey to a decolonized view through her research and findings about vaccination. And this happens during the COVID lockdown. So without going too much into the story itself, I will actually outline the research that went into this story, as that's a good place to start. Now, what you're seeing on your screen there is a mummy from nearly 2,300 years ago. And it was, this mummy suffers from smallpox. Now, smallpox has been eradicated for a really long time, but what we know about it is that it was a highly contagious virus and it spread from person to person contact. And the early symptoms were of high fever and fatigue. Then a rash appeared, and 2 to 3 days later on the face and arms, and it filled with pus. And then it formed a crust, which dried off and fell. Now, a healthy person could get infected if they inhaled the fluid droplets from an infected individual. Many survived, but some even turned blind. And anyone who survived developed a lifelong immunity from subsequent outbreaks. So this was the nature of the disease that we're talking about. Now, this is a disease that had spread far and wide. We can see that 2,300 years ago, 3rd century BCE, there's the rashes found on 3 mummies in Egypt. By 4th century CE, which is 1,600 years ago, unmistakable written descriptions appear in China. By 6th century, which is 1,400 years ago, increased trade with China and Korea introduces this disease in Japan. The Arab expansion spreads it to Northern Africa, Spain, and Portugal by the 7th century. By 11th century, the Crusades further spread it in Europe. Portuguese occupation introduces it into western parts of Africa by the 15th century. By 16th century, European colonization and African slave trade imported into the Caribbean, Central, and South America. And nearly 200 years ago, which is in 1800s, we see that smallpox finally makes its way here in Australia as well. And then comes Jenner. Now, both smallpox and Jenner are important in the story of Shitara because today, if you asked Google, who is the father of vaccination, it's Jenner. That is what the initial or internet answer is going to be. Now, Jenner was an extremely curious, studious, and enterprising young man. So I'm not speaking here to take anything away from Jenner's greatness. He has a fascinating biography, and you're welcome to read more about him online. By the age of 13, he was already working as an apprentice with his local doctor. By the time he was 21, so to start as an apprentice under a famous surgeon in London. And in 3 years, by the time he was 24, he came back to his hometown and he started practicing as a GP. So this is happening in 1773. Now, Google and Wikipedia will tell you that Jenner knew, even as a young boy, that it was common knowledge across Europe. If you suffer from cowpox, you don't die or suffer from smallpox. So that was the common knowledge, which is the basis for Jenner to successfully develop the vaccine. So he starts experimenting with smallpox in 1796, and he successfully develops the cure in 1797. Now, promptly, he writes to the Royal Society, who reject his cure because it is too outlandish. So they reject his cure. And what happens then is he writes to other doctors nearby, and they experiment and they find success with his method. And eventually in 1802, the British Parliament recognizes his work and they award him £10,000. Now his work is considered so significant and great that 5 years later, they give him another £5,000. Have you ever seen a magician? Now the magic is not in what he shows. The magic is in what he hides. You see, this is an article printed on the 30th of September, 2020 by BBC Futures. The article's name is Chilling Experiment That Created the First Vaccine by Richard Hollingham. In this article, Renee Najera, who is an epidemiologist and the editor of History of Vaccines website, she narrates the incident of how orphans were used as vaccine carriers and sent to UK and to South America. And there you get a striking admission that Jenner did his experiments without knowing what he was dealing with. Okay. Now, is that the only one? Stay tuned because there's more. So this is a testimony from Professor Sheila Cruikshank, who is the professor of immunology in the University of Manchester. She echoes similar sentiments. And she tells us that nor did Jenner know the science underlying the discovery. There was no understanding that smallpox was caused by the variola virus. She goes on to say that a lot of what they were doing was relying on creating immunity, creating antibodies, creating memory, and they had no concept of that. Okay, so this is where we're at. So at this stage, if you don't already have questions, we're in trouble because there are a lot of questions. If it was common knowledge across Europe for so many centuries, why had Europe not developed a cure? Why had someone before Jenner not put 2 and 2 together? Jenner was a practicing GP for 23 years before he decided one day, I'm going to now investigate a smallpox cure. Okay. And then the disease that has plagued this world for centuries gets solved in a year's time. What happened? What is the matter? Kuch to hai. Now the answer, surprisingly, or actually not so surprisingly, comes to us from the Bharatiya wisdom. The obvious gap that the Bharatiya wisdom filled for Europe is that missing link. It's the concept of adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is a concept that immunity occurs after exposure to an antigen, either from a pathogen or a vaccination. Bharat and its rich medical advances provided Europe with the understanding that an infection can be introduced in a non-immune person. Jenner was able to then cleverly combine 2 and 2 together and use the common knowledge with the concept to come up with vaccination, which has progressed to how we understand it today. So Jenner may have been acknowledged as the father of vaccination, but the underlying wisdom comes from an IKS. And I'm going to give you an account of that. Jenner was able to make his vaccination after this very important address. Now, this is an address by Dr. John Howell, who has presented that to the London College of Physicians in 1767. Remember, Jenner started his work in 1796, and he has perfected the vaccine by 1797. This address has already happened before that. In the book, actually, this is the 3rd or the 4th account. There's several other accounts that we can see much before that. In fact, the British and the French have documented variolation or inoculation as the original method that was practiced as far back as 1581 already. They have documented it themselves. But in this 3rd account, Dr. Howell tells us that a particular tribe of Brahmins are delegated annually for the service of inoculation. They arrive at their respective destinations some weeks before the usual return of the disease. Further on, he tells us that until they have considered the state of the season and acquired the information on the state of the distemper, they don't dispense the treatment. So now we're looking at a specialized branch who not only knew when the disease came, they also had a nuanced understanding to assess when was the right time to deliver the treatment. This is not something you can achieve in 1 or 2 seasons or 1 or 2 years. But that's not all. He goes on to tell us the process of how they deliver the treatment. He also tells us about the instruments that they use. And most importantly and curiously, he tells us that they never inoculate with fresh matter, nor with matter from the disease caught in the natural way. So this tells us that these Vrindavan or Banaras Brahmins had sufficient understanding of immunology to know that less virulent strain of that contagion need to be used for variolation. So in the end, the timeline that we get is something like this. 1802, vaccination, the one that Jenner developed, becomes popular. But you know what? Even before Jenner is born, we have 2 other accounts, one by by Robert Coult to Dr. Oliver Coult, which is a letter, and another is a separate account, which mentions the existence of inoculation as the practice. So after all of this, we can clearly see that the foundational knowledge that led up to Jenner developing the vaccine does come from Indian sources. But after all of that, you would expect, if someone's cured something that has been ongoing for such a long time, you would expect some kind of gratitude. You say thank you even to your doctor as you're walking out of their room, even if they've not given you a medication, or you think this doctor has done nothing for me, you'll still say, deliver the lip service and say thank you as you're walking out. We did not get any of that. What we got instead is this. So these are just a few of the several accounts, but we have testimony from Dr. Kirkpatrick, who arrogantly says that, you know what, variolation, inoculation doesn't matter. What is more important is that the English woman took her kids to that Indian fella to get the treatment. That is more important. The second testimony account says, this wonderful invention was found not by the learned sons of erudition, but by a mean, coarse, rude sort of people. That's you and I. Mean, coarse, and rude sort of people. So by 1758, we have people saying that England may be termed as the native country of inoculation. They have themselves documented that India is doing it, but they're printing whatever they would like. So this is the power of media, printed media. That is why we need to be able to exercise control over some element of printed media as well. But eventually in 1810, we have encyclopedist Sir George Baker, who has made similar remarks. And he basically says inoculation was originally received from the hands of ignorance and barbarism. But his countrymen did not measure the value of the practice by the meanness of its origin, but by its real importance and utility. So it doesn't matter that you've created the cure, you've made it available. No thanks to you. We've done it ourselves. And before we know it, today, if you Google or you look for this information, you would have to do 3-4 layers of digging to be able to arrive at this information. Nothing on the internet will readily tell you that this was the Indian contribution. But on the other hand, how did Jenner develop his vaccine? There is full story. You can even find out the name of his gardener's son, 8-year-old James Phipp, on whom he did the experiment. Sarah Nelms was the dairy maiden from whom he got the pus of the cowpox. So all of that information is there, but you will not know anything about Vrindavan and Banaras Brahmins or what they did. So that was the first story. But guess what? It doesn't matter that they did not give us credit. We have already documented this information in our texts. This is a small excerpt from Sushrut Samhita, and Sushruta accurately describes, he calls smallpox Masurika, and he talks about this as a Kshudra Roga. So it was possibly not as widespread at his time, but by the time you look at Madhavkara and Vagbhata's works in the 7th and the 8th century, they are talking more in depth about it. So even if we disregard Sushruta's time, by the 7th or the 8th century already, we have documented information about how Bharat was treating that. And in fact, we should not be surprised. There's clear documented knowledge transfer that happens out of Bharat to the Middle East at that time as well. So this is probably a good segue for us to go into the next story, which is the Sushrut story. Now, as Shwetaji mentioned at the beginning, it's a 10-part documentary as well as research, which I've done with Shri Nilesh Oak, who's a Mahabharat researcher, and a history researcher, Shri Sanket Kulkarni. This documentary is available on YouTube. And if anyone's interested in looking at the original references, documents, etc., they're on my website. So let's start with what we find today. Today, if you asked, who is the father of surgery? That's Sushrut. Why? Because he has treated numerous cases of rhinoplasty and a few other plasties. So there's undeniable proof. That's why we can get that information. But that is half truth. And we shall explore that with the story of Kawasji. Now, this Kawasji is a bullock cart driver. Now, we came across this story because it is actually printed in the Gentleman's Magazine, October 1794. This was one of the first magazines ever printed, and it remained in print for nearly 200 years. So this is when there was no social media, and people were actually writing letters across countries and across empires. And you know, the fashion of writing open letters, this is what it was. They were writing open letters and they would respond to each other in newspapers. So that is where there's a letter printed, and this letter leads us to the story of Kawasji. Now, Kawasji is a bullock cart driver in the service of East India Company. And during the Third War between Tipu and the English, Kawasji worked for the English army, ferrying goods and people. He became a prisoner of war. And as was the case at the time, Tipu's soldiers chopped off his nose and one hand. So what that meant was he instantly became not so good for the army. So then he was sent to be a servant at an English officer's home in Pune. Now, this English officer, he did not like the unsightly hole in the nose, so to speak. And eventually it comes to a point where there's a kumbhar or a potter on the streets of Pune who is able to fix this. So that English officer gets that kumbhar, and he also calls two physicians, Thomas Caruso and James Findlay. These are the two physicians. And they witness as this potter is fixing Kawasji's nose. Now, why is this important? This is important because we're talking about 1794. At the time, same was the case in Europe as well, where noses would be chopped. But what they were doing was they would take a shaft of the skin from either here or the thigh, and they would graft it there. And that would mean the skin would die off and it would become a crumply nose that just fell off. So it was a pointless exercise. But what the Indians did was genius. They took a flap from the forehead and they folded it down and they left the ridge there. So what that meant was the nose continued healing and it was still a live organ, not a dead one. And that was the genius that meant they could reproduce noses as they were. And this scar, it was unsightly, but not as bad as not having a nose at all. So this scar over time became negligible. So that was the genius of the surgery. Now, once this information, the physicians got that, they obviously wrote back and they told, this is what we saw here in India. Even a potter is able to do it. Okay. Then that begins the experimentation. What you see on the left side is 1816, J.C. Carpue performs and writes about 2 successful operations for restoring a lost nose. Then in 1818, you have Carl Ferdinand von Graf talking about rhinoplasty. And so people have started experimenting and writing books. By the time you come to 1845, you have that knowledge spreading across, and Germans are also talking about it. Italians are talking about it. Everyone's doing it. And the method was so popular that in the literature, it's actually called the Indian flag. So by 1897, there are 152 such documented procedures that are successfully performed. Now, in this story, there's another interesting bit. Now, we saw already that these are the tangible benefits that the empire was reaping from taking the knowledge from us. What was also happening was, there's one, in the effort to undermine the knowledge system, they were playing other games as well at the same time. You see, there's another book called the Bauer Manuscript, which is till date considered one of the oldest manuscripts. Now, the original name of Bauer Manuscript is now Neetakam. Since Hamilton Bauer discovered it, it came to be known as Bauer Manuscript. Just like anyone can discover Ramasetu and they can call it Adam's Bridge. So you can give whatever name you want because you've discovered it. Okay, that's the doctrine of discovery. But anyway, so there was a scholar called Hernley, and he was given the Bauer Manuscript. And he took a really long time to decipher it. He took nearly 4 years to simply publish the index of that particular book. And it takes him nearly 2 decades to be able to translate and publish that. And he finishes his work by 1914. So two decades in deciphering the Bauer Manuscript. Now that obviously then by his estimate made it the oldest document. Now in this particular document, now in Neetakam, is the particular surgery that we're talking about. It is clearly described in that particular document. So you can see that the Indian knowledge system is enabling that advance, but at the same time, would you believe, what do they write about it in the newspaper? British Medical Journal is telling you that to criticize the subject matter of this work would be labor wasted. Its interest is rather antiquarian than scientific. No doubt, many of the articles of the Hindu Materia Medica are of important therapeutic character and might with advantage be tested in the hospital. But it's a collection of complex farragos prescribed according to a fanciful and erroneous pathology, and it's practically useless. This is their assessment of the knowledge that they're absorbing from us. But I'll tell you what, this is a public assessment. Behind the scenes, in private, they have continued mining this information. Otherwise, how can you explain someone investing and funding the translation works for nearly 20 years? So we start seeing a pattern. As we start understanding what's happening, the pattern makes itself evident. At the same time, we have Kavi Kunjalal Bishagratna and his books, actually, an English translation of Sushrut Samhita. They're published in 3 volumes between 1907 and 1916. Now, we do not know when he started his work or who's commissioned it, but effectively, he produced a gift that keeps on giving. What do I mean by that? That was the first time that Europe and the Britishers came face to face with the magnanimity of the Indian text. So Sushrut Samhita, 184 chapters, 300 surgical procedures, 1120 diseases, injuries, and conditions, 700 medicinal herbs, their applications, taste, and efficacy, 64 medicines from mineral sources, 57 from animal sources. So much information became available to them after that particular book was translated in English. Not only that, the text also describes surgical techniques of making incision, probing, extraction, foreign body, thermal cauterization, tooth extraction, you name it, hernia surgery, C-section, all of that is there. Even principles of fracture management, traction manipulation, all of that information is there. So it's a really long list of what information we had locked in our knowledge systems. Of the huge body of work, that what you see on your screen are the instruments of that trade. Now, these are mentioned in chapter 7, Yantra Vidhi Adhyay, and they describe the 6 different groups or types and their uses as well. What do you make? How do you prepare the instrument? How to use it? All of that information. So that was also unlocked for Europe through that translation. Somewhere in that translation, if we read carefully, we find Dr. Hirschberg of Berlin's testimony. And that testimony tells us, to Sushruta is attributed the glory of discovering the art of cataract crouching, which was unknown to the surgeons of ancient Greek and Egypt. Further, he admits that the whole plastic surgery in Europe took a new flight when the cunning device of the Indian workman became known to us. So you see, in just a couple of books that came out of the tapas of our rishis, they were sufficient to kickstart a revolution in the field of medicine and surgery. Now, this was like finding a lost treasure. And this is where our third story begins. Who's bored already? Is anyone bored? No? Show of hands? No? Okay. So this is our final story. And kahani mein twist wali kahani. Okay. You remember the English translation that I mentioned before, the one of Sushrut Samhita by Kavi Kunjalal Bishagratna? Well, can you guess who owns the copyrights? It is the Wellcome Group. On your screen is a screenshot of the website from Wellcome Group. It's basically a global charitable foundation established in 1936, and that was founded after the death of Sir Henry Wellcome. But more importantly, on the left, can you see license and credit? It says license in copyright. So I actually checked, what does it mean? It basically means that the item is protected by copyright and or related rights. You are free to use this item in any way that is permitted by the copyright and related rights legislations that apply for you to use. So effectively, an English translation of Sushrut Samhita, which Sushruta will have written just like that for the welfare of mankind, is now a copyright piece outside of India. So our dharohar is sitting somewhere as a copyright. It's actually in a museum. So how did it get there? Well, this is Sir Henry Wellcome. He was a British-American pharmaceutical entrepreneur. He founded the pharmaceutical company called Burrow, Wellcome and Company. And that was with his colleague in 1880. It became one of the 4 large companies which eventually merged to become GlaxoSmithKline. Now, internet will tell you that it was his pioneering approach to drug design that inspired the creation of the first leukemia drug, of immune suppressants for organ transplant, and even the first drug approved to treat HIV. So in his will, he left to the Wellcome Foundation 3 things: his wealth, his collection of historical medical items, and a mission to improve health through research. But here's the interesting question. How did he get that collection? Enter Paira Mall. Paira Mall was a young Indian doctor, and in 1911, he was recruited by Henry Wellcome. Henry Wellcome basically told him not to return until India is completely ransacked as far as we possibly can for literature and other objects of interest connected with ancient medicine. So he gave Moll a salary of £250 a year. He gave him a waterproof bag. It had the whole kit. So there was a folding cam, bed, chair, table, 2 Jaeger rugs, and a camera. And his task was to ransack India for any object. So he was meant to do that for a year, but 11 to 15 years later, Paira Mall was still wandering Southeast Asia. He was staying in towns, hermitages, remote villages and settlements. And by the time the First World War came, he was still hard at work, but he was unable to send any of the material back. Eventually, when he was able to, trucks and trucks, crates load of stuff arrived in London as soon as he could organize the shipping. And those crates upon crates contained medical instruments, books, fabrics, dried herbs, sculptures, popular prints, ancient paintings, you name it. It's all there in the Wellcome collection today. From the available correspondence, it looks like maybe Pyra Mall demanded too much money. And over time, his demands came to be rejected, and he eventually vanishes from the record. But before vanishing, he's transferred a lot of information out of India. So you're probably wondering, what good is all of this to us today? Well, we can close the loop. We can clearly see how non-scientific materia medica, which came from a false science, a false religion, has enriched those who came to colonize us. Don't forget, at the same time, the originators of this grand knowledge were being actively deprived and denied of it. For example, traditional inoculation was banned in Bharat after Jenner's method became popular. And as we've already seen, Sanskrit was degraded at the behest of Macaulay. Now let's look at some tangible examples of how this knowledge was actually monetized in this day and age. You see, while current India is busy mocking the Naga sadhus who are able to display their yogic prowess by sleeping on a bed of nails, someone was paying attention. On Amazon today, a Shakti mattress or Shakti mat sells for $80. I kid you not, $80. When our Nani and Aji were telling us to dab turmeric on that wound or have a neem bath for that acne, we did not pay attention. We still don't. But someone is paying attention. Not only that, they did the research, they extracted the active ingredients, and they turned it into every kind of profitable product. So everything from curcumin for inflammation tablets to neem butter, even neem pesticide spray, organic pesticide spray, everything. Now, was this limited to physical products? Well, as you can see on your screen are the trends and analysis for yoga, which is now considered an industry. The yoga industry is worth 88 billion, and the yoga market is well worth 130 billion, and it is expected to go to 215 billion by 2025. Okay, and final, the mindfulness, even meditation, is now an industry. So it is slated to be a $9 billion industry by 2027. So the question is, who benefits? Are these not opportunities that we, as the traditional custodian of this knowledge, should explore and benefit from? I'm hoping that this demonstrates the power as well as the untapped potential of our Bharatiya Jnana Parampara. If this is what just a couple of books can do, can you imagine the mind-boggling repository of knowledge, what it contains and what its potential is? So we looked at this in the beginning, and I bring it back to say that everything we've heard of as a challenge also hides an opportunity within. What we don't have anymore, we have to relearn, we have to re-earn. We must earn what we've earned, we must retain. And what we've retained, we must make flourish. I also believe that commerce is an important part of this new or changed dynamic, because with the traditional systems of patronage now long gone, we need to find new ways to not only bring the knowledge to the fore, but also support those who are doing it. So for me, I think I can say that I will revitalize that by trying to study Sanskrit. But if we encounter co-option, appropriation, or erasure anywhere, then we should challenge it with irrefutable facts. But I think here I'm probably converting, I'm preaching to the converted, isn't it? Because you're all here and you're all doing it already. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, that I'm going to ask you, the scholars, to lead the way and show us how you are going to do it. So KKSU is already emerging as one of the leading multidisciplinary universities. So you're already rejuvenating and disseminating the universal value, knowledge, wisdom, and vision presented in Sanskrit language and its literature. So I'm confident that the audience here today is best placed to establish a progressive synthesis between ancient Indian wisdom and modern scientific thought. It's a great responsibility, yet something with limitless opportunities. So with that, I conclude my thoughts, and I'm ever so grateful for your time and for this fantastic opportunity.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. It was indeed an eye-opener and wonderful. Thank you so much, madam. It was indeed a wonderful session. And our students here needed such kind of lecture stories through which they got inspired, and I'm sure they will search, research, and definitely going to explore IKS from this angle also. Here, I would like to tell you, madam, that students, more than 140 students are sitting there in the hall and enjoying your session.
But thank you all for coming and listening.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to just add 140 only in one screen, and there are another 90 to 95 people who are actually even have joined online also.
Thank you. Yes. I would like to hear from the students about what they think. 1 or 2 students, if you don't mind.
Oh, ma'am, we'll
Gives me a good
some
boost.
time for conversation. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, say that again, please.
We can have discussion session, madam, for 5
Sure.
or 10 minutes.
Whoever students are online, they may raise their hand so I can unmute them.
Sure.
Dear students, research scholars, you are having 5 minutes of time for discussion. So if you have any query, you may ask by raising your hand. So we will unmute your mic.
Yeah, and for
Anybody?
the first time, madam can answer in Marathi as well, in international.
Yes, you can ask in Marathi
You can
also
ask
today
question in
because
Marathi as well. Yes.
Can I stop sharing my screen? Am I still sharing it?
No, I've stopped.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So I personally have a question, madam. So, so one thing is that what led you towards this? I mean, what is the igniting factor? Because now, from the past 2-3 years, if we see, maybe in many disciplines, the rediscovering, which I call it as, is happening. Even if you see, the nature is also, it's like there are many idols coming out of, which were buried very, 100 years ago. The idols of many devatas are, coming up by themselves. So in that way, what was the triggering point? As medicine maybe is not your core discipline, but how could, what was your journey and what was your igniting factor about, what was that igniting factor which led you through the whole process of writing Shitara?
Okay. So I suppose I might have to go a little further back than Shitara, and I just got thrust into things basically as a mother. That came as a challenge to me. So as my son is growing up here in Australia, what is it that you have to do to keep that child rooted in where he comes from? And if you don't have the contextual, historical connection, cultural background available or around you, because in India, just by osmosis, we learn everything. Often we don't know the reason, but we learn everything. And that was a deliberate effort that I had to take with him, but more so in terms of answering from a point of view that made sense to him. You know, everyone wants to know, what is the science? Give me evidence, give me facts. So in that kind of an environment, you have to be able to provide answers that make sense, or you have some credence or history to be able to provide to them. And that is how I started reading, so that I could understand better to respond to his queries. And reading was something that I've enjoyed. Research is something I enjoy as well. So I think one thing led to another. And even before I knew it, I came across Nileshji's research about Sushrut and his Samhita. So I said, all right, this is something that people need to know or digest in a simpler form. I don't consider myself a scholar or learned in any way. I'm a simple person who needs simple facts. Easy karke batao. So that is what I did for myself. And somehow I find that it has resonated with people to a point where I was able to take on the adventure of writing Shitara. So I read all of the research and I said, all right, how can I simplify this? And for me, the most natural way was obviously a conversation, because the person in the book, Nana, the one who gently directs this protagonist, was none other than my own Azoba. My Azoba was an Ayurveda Acharya. My mother's father was an Ayurveda Acharya, as well as my father's father. So, you know, how people decide to do things on their own. I did that, and I chose not to study medicine when I had no idea that I was making the wrong decision. But often, you know, freedom of expression, I'm going to express myself. So 40 years, in my 40s now, I'm saying maybe I should have done that, but I didn't do that. So I suppose my contribution back to that area is through this way, to tell people that, yes, there's a lot of merit, there's a lot of knowledge that's packed in our books and knowledge systems, and please explore that. So that was the effort through Shitara, and that was how I came here.
Thank you, madam. Pushkar, you had a question?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So first of all, Mitra ma'am, thank you so much for the session. And the last things which you mentioned, which I have experienced myself, that घरी मला काटा जरी रुतला तरी तिथे रुईचं पान लावलं जायचं, रुईचं दूध, which eventually तो काटा तरी बाहेर येऊन जायचा. So first I used to be skeptic about it, की का लावायचं. But the moment I experienced it and I got the output, now I'm in a position that if I see someone going from the same pain, I suggest him the same medicine. So this is kind of a thing which we have experienced at the home and which we can pass on to the next generation with the reasons or with the validation. My question to you is, as Srinivas already mentioned, in past 2-3 years, there has been a great progress in the IKS and technology system. There has been a IKS center also we have at our university. So can we call it that this period can it be considered as a renaissance for the IKS?
Most certainly. There is so much interest, so much, I suppose it's interest from within, as well as people like me are now finding we're at a time and place in our lives where we also want to go back home. So it's inside out and outside in. So this is most definitely indicative of renaissance. And I can't wait to see what it looks like in the next 5 to 10 years, because, I mean, we just talked about one particular field. Imagine if all the students, all of you here, are able to take this idea and apply it to whichever field you're going to, whether it is business or entrepreneurship, or whether it is science, engineering, whatever. If you're able to apply the same bent of mind or same curiosity to those topics, then I'm excited for what the future looks like and what it brings. But that's why I said it's a great responsibility on all of you.
Absolutely, ma'am. I would like to just mention one thing, that under the IKS, which is funded by AICT in India, there is the IKS branch of AICT. And right now there are 13 centers all over the India which are doing the same research. Like they are trying to do research with mathematics and our ancient text, science and our ancient text, chemistry. There was one guy from IIT Banaras who was doing chemistry and the ancient text. So this all research is going on, and we all are excited to see what is the
Masta.
output of it.
And we ourselves
Okay.
in here have an IKS center. We are working on the documentation of manuscripts. So which is the main, hotbed of IKS, from where you rediscover the text. So the process starts with the documenting of manuscripts. So we are doing our part, in KKS.
मस्त. Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, can you take me as a student? मला विद्यार्थी म्हणून घेता
Yeah,
का?
we do have an ODL section, madam, wherein we do have some international students also. You can definitely join our ODL for any course. There are
Okay.
some students. The students who are there in the hall. जेवन सर, वहाँ पे भी हमने अनम्यूट करने का ये दिया है. कोई वहाँ से पूछना चाहता है तो वो प्रश्न पूछ सकते.
I think we can go for
वहाँ पे
the
पहला
second.
अनम्यूट करना है. वो उस फोन
हाँ,
को
वहाँ
पहला
पर
अनम्यूट करो और जो पूछना चाहता है वो शायद वो फोन या कुछ लेके अपने हाथ में पूछिएगा. माइक की कोई जरूरत नहीं, वैसा मत करो. आप फोन ले लीजिए, माइक को ऑफ कीजिए, फोन ले लीजिए हाथ में और पूछिए.
लैपटॉप से भी पूछ सकते हैं.
हाँ, वही से पूछ लीजिए. माइक को ऑफ कीजिए. वहां पे जो नॉर्मल माइक है उसको ऑफ कीजिए.
I think many students have joined from their mobile because it is generating. They can write in chat box also.
You can write your question in text box also. Chat
Because
Yeah.
Even any other students who are there who are connected online, they also can raise their hands to ask questions.
Okay, I think it may take some time to sort out things. We will proceed to the presidential. Is our honorable VC sir is there, and he has another commitment also afterwards. So we'll proceed for the next presidential. Shweta ji.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. Now I would like to request Professor Madhusudan Penna sir for presidential address.
Thank you, Joshi sir. Thank you, Sharma ji. Desai madam, many thanks, because your lecture was really eye-opening, and I firmly believe that definitely many of the youngsters will be inspired, and they will definitely work on Indian knowledge systems. As you said in your lecture, many disciplines are there in Indian knowledge systems which need to be revived, restudied, redeliberated upon. And the youngster should not just be content with the peripheral knowledge of the systems, but they should delve deep into the core of the subject so that they can really contribute anything. Because mostly I find among the youngsters that most of them are led by emotional drive, that I am doing something that's good, but it is a kind of affection for the subject. But if that student gets deeper into the subject, then in future, definitely we can expect after 5 or 10 years study, he will significantly contribute to the development of that particular knowledge system. And I remember that a particular generation satisfies itself with the general knowledge of the subject and feels that it is okay. And another generation that gets deeper into that, and another generation that brings out the core of the subject. So thus, at different levels, we find the study and research being done in the field of Indian knowledge systems. And recently, AICT has introduced this Indian knowledge systems, and many NGOs have been working on that. And I remember one village near our Ramtek, that is Kamti. So there in the 18th century, there was one Garasram Sharma, and he was a Brahmin belonging to the Kamti village, Dharma Sabha. So when we visited his ancient, that ancestral house, so his descendants are there still living. So we got through his collection and found one Vandhya Jivanam manuscript. He wrote it in Hindi, and there he has identified some 36 kinds of infertility, and he had made it very clear that the infertility also depends on sometimes the male, sometimes the female body. So he has identified that male related infertility issues, female related infertility issues. And I was wondering that such a book was, of course, very much studied during his time, but when it came to 20th century and 21st century, that book became a forgotten text and fallen into oblivion to many of the students, researchers, and even professionals in Ayurveda. So this, when I brought to the attention of the local Ayurveda doctors who had been working on infertility, they were so overthrilled. We had handed it over to local scholar Rambahu Pujari also then, but now it is missing. So in the context of this Indian knowledge systems, I feel that such rare original creative works should not be forgotten, and people should make all efforts to bring out such texts into light so that proper work can be done on them. Always it should not be just emotional that we are doing something. Yes, I am also attached to Sanskrit and Indic knowledge systems, but like that is being done in IIT Mumbai. The serious research is being done there, and in some other institutes like CDAC also. Like recently, a person submitted a thesis from IIIT. His thesis was based on one single definition of Vakya from Vakyapadiya, but a very wide, beautiful, comprehensive study that it engulfs everything, like socio-linguistic aspect of analyzing one particular definition of a sentence is really very impressive. I was so impressed that I wrote a very positive report and asked them to permit us to publish the book also. So that kind of very innovative research is being done, and we in the prime institutes of India are so convinced that now Sanskrit is in right hands. There are good scholars, there are good researchers, and who are really very creative. Recently, I mentioned somewhere that the Havana farming is also taking place in near the places in Bangalore and in Berlin also. Very typically, the foreign scholars are also interested in going after the Havan farming and its effect on our aura and the physiological effects of that Havan farming, etc. I got a thesis from Berlin, so I was so because the questionnaire is in German, and it's really very impressive work that the researcher has produced. It actually inspires so many young researchers to work on similar line and bring out the core of research. Similarly, very typically in Navyanyaya Shastra, people very often say that some of the Navyanyaya concepts correlate with the Boolean algebra, and such work is done. Though preliminary, that work is being done. But very typically, that Boole, George Boole, his uncle was George Everest, on whose name the Everest is named. So George Everest visited India. He studied some of the texts, and he was really fascinated. And he, when he returned, he told his nephew that I studied this, and these are the remarkable aspects of our Indian knowledge systems. And George Boole, he was created. Now we find George Boole's creation and determinant equations also. So the inspiration behind is forgotten.
Yes.
Some people say Mendeleev, Mendeleev, when he created the table, he was inspired by the Maheshwara Sutra of Panini. But unfortunately, the source of inspiration is being forgotten, and only the peripheral result is being given credit. That is most unfortunate thing. But I'm very happy that Indian Institute of Sciences and IIT Mumbai, like these institutes. So we find some people seriously working on like Brahmagupta theorem, like pi calculation or other mathematical calculations. So they are seriously working on that. Such serious work is required, and just praising and providing information is unfortunately not the real mark of scholarship. So people, especially the youngsters, should work on chosen topics, because you may require 8 to 10 years to study and assimilate one particular discipline, whether it is yoga, Ayurveda, Vastu, any Tantra. So even Nyaya Shastra, Vedanta Shastra, it may require 8 to 10 years also. But after assimilating the essence of that particular Shastra, you are supposed to dedicate yourself to one particular topic so that you can really work on that, and that particular work will definitely be received positively by people at large. So this what I feel, and I really have all appreciation for the great lecture that Desai madam has given. I was really taken aback that you are in Australia, but you have madam, really great that you have got the information, so solid information, concrete information that is required for modern research. So you must be in a university like us, and you must inspire the young researchers, ma'am, because most of the teachers also lack this particular skill, that how to glean information and process the information and present it to the next generation. And I have all kudos to you, Desai madam. Really, I have become your fan. So because I have listened to I have listened to earlier speakers also, and most of the speakers, they dwell on their understanding of the topic and one side presentation. But yours is really very useful, informative, inspiring, and these are not just for appreciation's sake, but I tell you that as a head of university, I feel that this kind of lectures should be arranged frequently, so that the young researchers will be really inspired to take up such kind of work. And presently, some of the scholars have been working on the quantum vacuum and Brahma concept. Indian Institute of Sciences, I am also associated with them. So I feel that really a kind of renaissance, so that is taking place in India, that new band of scholars is being created, new skills are added, new technologies being used, and real Indian knowledge systems are explored. In the All India Science Congress, I was the nodal officer from our university, ma'am. That was the 104th session organized in Mumbai University. So I was the nodal officer, and I saw that many people were interested in Indian knowledge systems. Previously, there was no place accorded for this Indian knowledge systems. Only science means Western. So mathematics, physics, chemistry, and other. So they were given prominence. But for the first time, because of our great effort, because Lele sir's initiation, we were given some chance to present ourselves. So as a nodal officer, I approached some of the good scholars from Bodas, from one aviation academy principal, and two scientists from Pune who worked on neuroscience. That means neurological aspect of yoga. And that Bodas worked on the ancient aeronautics, Indian aeronautics, the Bharadwaja Vaimanika Sutra from Yantra Sarvasva. And another one worked on the Sushruta instruments. So some some instruments were really prepared, madam. We've sponsored some instruments were really
Yes.
prepared.
We have that, sir, in our gallery also.
Yeah, in our Ramtech University campus,
I
we
have to come visit it then.
Sure, ma'am. Welcome, welcome. And you see, ma'am, what kind of scissors and the instruments they used during the surgery, it is really marvelous. And such papers were presented. But there was a really basic question that we have been praising that we had everything, we are great, our ancestors were really great. But there was a small question that on the basis of the Vedic science, have you produced anything now so that we can really boast up ourselves that this is the knowledge, this is the result, and we can really pat on our shoulders. Yes, this we have produced. So I was asking Boda sir also, when you talk about the capsule on consuming with, you will totally come out of all these things. That means biological needs and no hunger, no thirst, and nothing. But that capsule, that ingredients, they are not mentioned. So the simple statement that there was a capsule mentioned in Bharadwaj Shastra and the pilots used to take that, that is only a hypothetical one. And if the ingredients are also presented and if people work really on that, and if a capsule is produced, then I feel that it will be a real great contribution to modern science. Such thing happen in Nagpur also. The local engineers and other scientists also worked on some methodology given in Vaimanika Shastra, and they put all the ingredients into that, like silicon, etc. They produced one glass-like material, and they sent it to Bangalore also, ma'am, so that for further authentication. And finally, they got it. It really contained the glass-like characteristics, but that research stopped there only. It could not go further. So I just dream that in my university also, the youngsters should really have that great zeal so that they can really get to these kinds of inspiring thoughts, core thoughts, and work on them. The university may provide laboratory equipment and other facilities. And I just dream that something solid can be produced. This year, the All India Science Congress will be held in Nagpur itself. Nagpur University is holding, and they have approached me for further collaboration, and I really gladly accepted, and I request all the students to really take it seriously so that they can come out with a novel research project. So your lecture has inspired me also, ma'am. Otherwise, I was not in a mood to talk because some interview going on. But whenever I find time, I listen to such lectures. Really, very scientific, very methodological, and inspiring. So thank you very much, ma'am, from the bottom of my heart. On behalf of our university, our School of Shastric Learning, I really thank you. And by the side, I would like to tell you, ma'am, we have one Gurukulam. This is Param Pujya Gulwalkarji Gurukulam in Ramtek. So it is recently named as School of Shastric Learning. So Gurukulam, School of Shastric Learning, where we will be teaching the Indian knowledge systems like Nyaya, Vedanta, Vyakarana, Jyotisha, Veda. So all these in their pristine form will be taught to the students, and the students, new generation of students will be created. That is the expectation. It may take 3 years, 5 years also, but such authentic scholars will be created who know the text, who know the nuances, who can really in a way explain the text properly, understand why the text is created, and furtherment of knowledge. So all these kept in mind, we have created one Gurukulam here, and it is really appreciated by all across the nation. That it is really good initiative that KKSU has started, and now we have entered into the 25th year, ma'am. So next month we will be celebrating the 25th year as Rajatotsav, and I'm planning to invite stalwarts to this function. And if you happen to be in India, you are most welcome, and see that you are in India.
I will happily come along, sir. From what you've told me, मला एवढं कळलंय की रामटेक is the place to be. It is a very happening place. मी next time भारतात आले ना की आधी तिकडेच येणार आहे.
मॅडम बघा, तुम्ही आल्यानंतर तुम्ही ऑस्ट्रेलिया विसरून जाणार, कारण की तुमचा आलाय आमचं रामटेक.
मग मी बॅगा पॅक करूनच येते तिथं रामटेक मध्ये
टाका मॅम. आणि तुम्ही असं करा, मग काही 7 दिवसांचे 10 दिवसांचे तुम्ही इथे काही चर्चा संवाद वगैरे ठेवून आमच्या स्टुडंटला काहीतरी शिकवा.
मला जरूर आवडेल, मला फार आवडेल.
So nice of you, ma'am. Very great, and so Catholic in mind also. That's really very, very, very inspiring. So Desai madam, you are with us with KKSU.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so very much. Thank you for your kind words, Madhusudan ji. आणि सगळ्या गुरुजनांनी जे आता इथे उपस्थित आहेत त्यांना परत पुन्हा एकदा, विद्यार्थी तुम्ही न कंटाळता अजून बसलाय मला दिसतंय तिथे कॅमेऱ्यामध्ये, त्यामुळे त्यासाठी मंडळ आभारी आहे. आणि आता सरांनी मला तिकडे बोलवून घेतलंय, त्यामुळे आता तुमची सुटका नाही, कारण मी तिथे येऊन बोलणार, हो की नाही?
नाही, बस आम्ही रामोद्वीर नाभिभाषते, आम्ही पलटणार नाही मॅडम, शब्द बदलवणार नाही.
रामोद्वीर
नाभिभाषते, एकदा आम्ही वचन दिला तरी आम्ही पाळणारच. तर तुम्ही नक्की या मॅडम. सप्टेंबर 18 तारखेला आपला कार्यक्रम आहे, आणि अगोदर आले खूप स्वागत, कारण की आमचे गेस्ट हाऊस मध्ये राहू शकता, आम्ही व्यवस्था करू. आणि बस आम्हाला कळवा फक्त.
जरूर सर, येणार.
थँक्यू सो मच मॅम. नमस्ते.
ओके, ऑलराइट, थँक्यू सो व्हेरी मच.
Mitraji, I would like to tell you that sir himself is an embodiment of IKS. He's specialized in Yoga Shastra, Nyaya Shastra.
I'm a big fan of his. You know that. I listen to his lectures. So that is why I was tensed. He's a YouTube star. His lectures are the one I listen to. So that's why I was kind of tensed when he was in the audience.
Wow, wonderful, ma'am. Desai, ma'am. Now there is a direct flight to Ramtek.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so very much
for your words. It actually ignited our session. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Professor Madhusudan Penna, sir, and then guest speaker for this session, Mitra Desai ji. It has been a session which we are actually looking for. We have planned such thing, and actually it works. So as you said na, before starting our session, that mind-boggling things happened sometimes. So this was that kind of session for all of us. And I would like to thank Professor Krishna Kumar Pandey sir for his presence. I would also like to thank Agasti sir, Professor Hari Krishna Agasti sir, Professor Agasti madam. I would also like to thank Professor Nandapuri madam, Professor Kavita Hole madam, Professor Chandratra madam, Professor Parag Joshi sir, Professor Prasad Gokhale sir, Marathe sir, CEO Smita Fadnavis madam, Dr. Sandeep Joshi from CSU Mumbai has also joined. I would like to thank him also. And my special thanks to DSW Director Jayvant Chaudhary sir for making special arrangement for students in hall, and thanks all the students, research scholars, heads, directors, and all the teaching staff who has given their precious times for this session. Thank you everyone. Thank you Amit sir for technical support, and all the SSL team. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you, sir.
We will conclude with the Shanti Mantra. Panditji.
Sure, sir.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. थैंक यू कन्ना सर, आपको हमने डिस्टर्ब किया इंटरव्यू के बीच में.
And thank you, special thanks to Srinivas sir as well for introducing us to Mitra Desai ji, madam. Thank you, sir.
I thank you, and Mitra
Thank you
ji
so
for
very much. आपण पुन्हा भेटूया.
accepting the invitation right away. So Shweta madam, I think you are the host now. I think you have to end the meeting. I
Sure,
just cannot.
sure.